I was sitting in my office late Friday, reviewing several applications from candidates who had learned that there would soon be an opening on our office staff. I worked as a regional director for a chemical company that supplied weed control chemicals, fertilizers, and soil water retention products. Our existence depended on farmers to grow or feed what we ate. In keeping with the trend towards eco-friendliness, we became the first company whose products were declared to be 100% environmentally friendly. 2 of my office employees gave notice that they were leaving because their husbands had received promotions at work, and as a result, they were moving within the next 3 months. The scramble began to find a replacement as quickly as possible. Our sales team covered 8 states here in the heart of the overflying country. Our sales growth this year has significantly exceeded expectations. Katie, my executive assistant, stopped by my office and said, "Ed, all 8 of them have confirmed their interviews for Monday. I'm leaving, so good night." Every Thursday, I would travel to one of the states in my area of responsibility for a half-day sales meeting on Friday, and then return home. As a result, Thursday night became my wife's night out with her friends. This has cost us a pretty penny in nannies over the years. My weekly travel provided our sales reps with the personal contact they needed to help them with job-related issues and their performance. This has paid big dividends over the years. In 8 years, I did not lose a single person, and this was considered an achievement for the company. I just got back today in time to check a few things before heading home. The company had been trying to convince me to give up this part of my job for several years. But I found that time alone gave me the opportunity to think things through in my own way. With an all-knowing wife and 3 children, the quiet time I spent behind the wheel was priceless. In addition, this saved our department from having to hire a sales manager. I had a reputation for working within a budget, and I wanted to keep it that way. With all of our children, now in middle and high school, and our oldest daughter, my pride and joy, set to graduate from high school and begin her studies at Southeast Missouri State University in the fall, things were looking good for our family. She was awarded a full scholarship by my employer. My youngest daughter had just turned 16 and was working hard to get her learner's permit. Grace, my wife of 20 years, was an executive assistant to the district attorney and worked in that position from the year before the birth of our youngest daughter. He had just been offered a new position as an attorney for the federal government, and he accepted it. The feds appreciated his no-holds-barred approach. He would be foolish to turn it down since it was twice the money. He was supposed to start in 4 months. I still couldn't understand him. He was about my age, but never married. I didn't know for sure, but contrary to rumors, I didn't believe he was gay. Every second weekend of the month for the past 15 years, my 3 children have been picked up by my parents to give my wife and I quality time together. When they started doing this, my wife and I were both at a crossroads in our marriage. My parents felt that we needed private time without the children around. I have to admit that this was the greatest gift they could have given us because it gave my wife and I time to find ourselves again. Without their action, we would have become another divorce statistic. They had about 3 months before it had to end, as Amy, my oldest daughter, was going to work in our senator's office in Washington for the summer before starting her graduate degree in political science. Some time ago, my father bought each of our 3 children a set from Ancestry.com as a joke, with my permission, and sent it as a joke. According to their instructions, we knew that a match would only be found if someone related to them submitted their DNA to the same program. My children talked to me about this, and I gave my consent, saying that we all have distant relatives that we do not remember or know about. Maybe this will open up a new adventure for us all. Amy suggested keeping it a secret from their mother until the results came back. We knew it could take up to 5 or 6 months to get a response. We headed to Nashville this weekend to visit the Grand Ole Opry and will be back home on Sunday. My wife was the one who planned this special trip as a way to create another memory in our life's journey. I met my wife Grace in my final year of university at a football match. No, I was not one of the players on the field. I was one of those invisible workers selling overpriced food to the spectators in the stands. She was one of the medical coach's youngest daughters, so she always had free tickets. She quarreled with her companion that day because of some stupidity that one of them took the wrong way. From push to impact. I found myself in the middle. She pushed him and stepped aside. He didn't see her move and hit me with all his weight from behind. I fell, rolling down the concrete steps, my tray of food tumbling along with me. The next thing I remember, I woke up in the hospital with my head wrapped in bandages. According to the doctor, I had 25 stitches due to a cut on my forehead. I guess Grace felt guilty because she came every day to make sure I was okay. She met my whole family before I started seeing the light again. I was later told that I was in a coma for almost a week due to internal injuries. As the fog around my vision began to clear, I saw an unknown goddess in front of me. At first, I believed that I had arrived at the mother-of-pearl gates and she was my angelic guide. Then my girlfriend became visible as a light next to her. Esmeralda was not happy with the vision standing next to her. I closed my eyes and went back to sleep, praying that Esmeralda wouldn't be there when I woke up and that it was just a dream. When I woke up, the dream was still there, but Esmeralda was not there. Esmeralda decided that she needed to find herself a new sweetheart to whom she would pay attention. God heard my prayer. Grace stayed by my side, demanding nothing as I slowly returned my life to normal. I never asked her, but we started dating. One thing led to another. As soon as we graduated, I went into sales and she got her first job as an executive assistant. At one of the family events, her younger cousin asked her why she wasn't married yet, and she said, "Because Ed hadn't proposed to me." 3 months later, I stood at the altar, watching the goddess walk towards me. She was 5 feet 8 inches tall with long blonde hair, deep, almost black eyes, and a figure that made men salivate. Grace and I got married. By the 5th year of our marriage, we had both reached a point where we were ready to leave. Until now, I could not understand why and how they pushed us apart. As far as I knew, she did too. We just left Lambert's on our way home, a restaurant for me that lived off its reputation. Its greatest asset is throwing their huge buns across the room in the air to be caught by customers, because the rest of their food was outdated, overcooked crap. We stayed at this tourist trap because it reminded my wife of her mother's home, cooking. Need I say more? For some reason, my wife turned off our sound system. When she did this, it meant that she had something serious that she wanted to talk about. I took a voice recorder out of my jacket pocket and turned it on. This was a trick I used for private conversations when I thought I might want to be able to check later what I said. "Ed," my wife Grace asked, "have you ever thought about cheating?" My first thought was, what caused this? My second, why is she asking this? Is she cheating, or does she know someone who is cheating? Why does she think this is important enough to talk about it right now? I needed to clear my mind of questions before I could speak. "Grace, let's be honest here," I said. "Everyone thought about cheating. It would be better to ask if I acted on it, and the answer would be no." "Why not?" Grace asked. "Because I made my vows when we got married," I said. "They meant something to me, and still do." "Given the changing views of society," Grace said, "marriage vows no longer have the value they once had. I think you should let them go and seriously think about finding a lover with whom you are compatible. If you are concerned about your own guilt, consider this my personal permission for you to move forward. And have one with my unconditional blessing. Having one can help you appreciate our relationship even more, and give you a deeper understanding of us by being us. This way, you can freely get the full value and pleasure from the relationship when you find the right woman you wanted. I wish I could have one without the burden of guilt." I had a problem with her new point of view because it implied that using other people for our pleasure and benefit was acceptable to her. This was unacceptable to me. This was a side of her that I had never seen before. It made me change my mind about things significantly. "Answer me this, my loving wife," I said. "Why is it so important to you that I have open communication with your approval? Have I done something so disgusting that you want to make an excuse to end our marriage?" After 5 minutes of silence, I turned the sound system back on. The lack of response spoke volumes to me. Grace always had an answer to everything. Now, she was silent. I asked myself why. Now, I truly believed that there was some reason why my loving wife wanted me to have an affair. But why? Regardless of the reason, I now firmly believed that something was seriously wrong in our lives. I knew I had to find out what it was. I drove for about an hour, and we were now about 40 miles from home when I saw my wife turn the sound off again. I took the recorder out of my jacket pocket and turned it on again. "I'm sorry, Ed," Grace said. "I guess I read too many Harlequin novels. These ideas must have come out of nowhere." With that, she turned our sound system back on, deciding that was the end of the topic. The problem is that our 3 children and I all knew that she hated those books because they were her mother's favorite books. All her life she called them trailer trash and thought she was better than that. Every time her mother gave her the last of them, Grace would take them home and throw them in the trash. As I drove the last 40 miles, I realized that the only thing I didn't know much about was her Thursday nights with her friends. It just wasn't important or serious enough to worry about. On the rare occasions when I was home, she was happy to change her schedule so she could be home with me too. Until today, I had no reason to doubt those nights because I trusted her completely. The problem I had to face was that because of the conversation we had just had, I now had reason to doubt what her Thursday nights with her friends were about. Did she go to bars with her friends and have questionable relationships, such as casual affairs? I knew that by the time I got home, I would need to find out what was going on during her girls' nights. We pulled into our driveway at the same time our kids and my parents did. After we walked into the house, I poured both my parents a rye and cola cocktail. They told me what they and the children did over the weekend. For my parents, quality time spent with their grandchildren was priceless. As they said, it was their grandchildren who helped them stay young and up to date. Each activity was planned according to their wishes, so my parents were involved in cultural activities that they had never experienced before. They stayed for about an hour before heading home. I walked them both to their car. "Ed," my father asked quietly, "when would be the best time to come to your office tomorrow for a private conversation?" "I have a job interview all day," I said. "Let's say about 3 o'clock. Whatever the problem, I'm here for you." "The problem is not your mom and me," my father whispered. "This is a problem involving your wife and her youngest daughter. It is best not to say anything more since your wife is watching us." "Okay, Dad, I can do this. I'll come by after work and we should be done in half an hour," I said loud enough for Grace to hear through the window. After I saw them leave, I went into the house and took the car keys. I then grabbed my toolbox and threw it into the trunk of my car. "Hey, honey," I said. "I need to stop by my dad's tomorrow after work and fix something, so I might be a little late." "I heard you from the window," Grace answered. "Don't worry, we can have dinner a little later." My father arrived on time with my mother. They were shown to my office. After we sat down, we waited for one of the staff to bring us coffee. Once it was served, Katie closed my office door on her way out. "Ed," my father said, "I'm so sorry for my stupid stunt of sending our grandchildren's DNA. They found a DNA match for April. She has a paternal grandmother who is looking for her son and his descendants." With that, he pulled out a form from Ancestry.com. It showed the woman's name and phone number. I was devastated. My father, looking at me, realized how hard it hit me. "Dad, I don't think it's a mistake, so let's see what we can all find out," I said. Using my office phone, I called the number and turned on the recording and speakerphone functions. I wanted to make sure I had a permanent record of the conversation. After 2 rings, he was picked up. "My name is Edward Paul Adams, and I am looking for Mrs. Beatrice Smith regarding a DNA match found thanks to Ancestry.com. I said. "Can I talk to her?" "You talk to her, young man," said the woman. "How can I help you?" "It's a complicated matter," I said. "In short, I just found out that my youngest daughter is your granddaughter." "Are you talking about April Marie Adams?" she asked. "Yes, exactly about her," I replied. "Then perhaps you know my son, whom I was forced to give up for adoption when I was only 15, she said. "Maybe if I knew his name," I said. "He was adopted by a family with the last name Barrow. His given name at the time was Luke Robert," Mrs. Smith said. My face turned pale. My parents had tears in their eyes because we knew this name so well. Her honest, straightforward remark turned into a nightmare from hell for me. "He's alive and well," I said. "He's currently the district attorney here in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. He's also my wife's boss. I can tell you, he never married. And now I think I know why. He's my only child," she said. "I have stage 4 lung cancer and I don't have long to live. Will you allow your daughter April to visit me before I go? If you can't afford it, I'll happily pay for the ticket. I'd like to meet her to give her your inheritance." "Mrs. Smith, given the circumstances, I'll let you make arrangements with my parents. Since you're only 1 state away from us, they'll take her on a special getaway this weekend so you can meet," I said. "I don't think this is a trip I'd let my daughter take on her own. Is there anything else you'd like me to do?" "Get a notarized statement authorizing my lawyer to conduct a DNA test," Mrs. Smith said. "Because of the value of April's inheritance, he will want to make sure for himself that she is who we think she is before he changes my will." "No problem, I'll pass this call on to my dad," I said. "He can discuss the details and get instructions on how to get to you." I stood up and walked out of my office, handing Katie my personal voice recorder with the request, "Convert both my conversations on this device and the phone call that I am still recording into text and have them notarized. I will need them in this form for the trial, divorce case. Do you want me to prepare permission for the DNA test as well?" Katie asked. Katie was smart. She remembered that when I played the tape, she had to listen quietly. By doing this in the past, many conflicts have been quickly resolved. "Yes," I said. "But we need to keep this a secret for a few weeks. I want to find out what my soon-to-be ex-wife was doing on her Thursday nights." I walked into my assistant's office and said, "David, I need to talk to you and your wife as soon as possible. I'm going to need your cooperation because of a personal matter." David looked at me and immediately realized that what I needed help with was a very serious matter. "She should be finishing her shift soon," David said. "I'll send her a message to come here." I returned to my office and we discussed the details. Using the spare key to my house, they were supposed to pack some things for April and head out the following Friday. I had to pick her up from school and take her to them by 10 in the morning. I was walking my parents to the door when David's wife arrived. I told her to come to his office and I would join them soon. Thanks to modern communications, Kathy already had copies and transcriptions ready. I gave a copy to David and Cheryl to read. I suggested that they first read the conversation between me and my wife. I gave Kathy the paper my father gave me to make photocopies of what my father received for my lawyer's file, which we were now creating, and told her to find me the best one. Both Cheryl and David have known my wife and I for many years. Both had a hard time with what they learned today. Cheryl and Grace grew door to door. Although they had never been close, they naturally knew everything about each other. Cheryl was shocked to learn the very reality of what had until now remained unknown. "Do you still think they're lovers after all these years?" Cheryl asked. "Or was this one of the situations where they got into it and later realized their mistake?" "I don't know, but I'll need your cooperation to find out," I said. "For the next few weeks, I need David to use the company car to travel to sales meetings. Cheryl, I will need to drive your car because no one will be looking for it. That means you will have to drive David's car. I will notify corporate. We're doing this as part of your cross-training, David, so I'm afraid you'll have to do this for the next 3 months. You're going to follow your wife on Thursday night and record everything you can," David said. "Because your wife will still think you're on your weekly trips. My gut tells me that this is still going on, because why would my wife suddenly ask me to have an affair with her blessing?" I said. "If Barrow hadn't changed his job, nothing would have changed. I believe Grace may have been planning to move in with Luke Robert Barrow when he started working in St. Louis. If Grace can prove that I'm having an affair, that's in her eyes would justify filing for divorce." "Damn," Cheryl said. "I can see that Grace could do something similar. Nowadays in our society, it is acceptable to blame an opponent for something you have already done. It is an effective way to divert attention from your own behavior. Ed, if you find evidence one of these Thursdays," Cheryl said, "call me and I'll have the dispatcher call a couple of cops to her and her lover saying, 'You were in an accident.' That way, I can give you the details. A police report, on the condition of their clothing or lack thereof, and where they were. Some cops would like to get a little revenge on the DA for some of his actions against them in the past. Kathy stopped by and said, "Dale Allen Britton left the DA's office 4 months ago because he couldn't work there anymore and started his own practice. I faxed him everything we have so far, and he is waiting for you. You better hurry." "Ed, give Dale my love and best wishes," Cheryl said, "and tell him we still miss him." I walked out the door to meet the man who was heading to the Supreme Court with the women's rights movement for Roe v. Wade. The way he looked at the law and how to apply it turned everything upside down. It became clearer. The problems in our marriage began immediately after Grace began working for Luke Barrow. This was around the same time I was promoted to sales manager and had to begin my 24-hour travel schedule for sales meetings. If they were still having an affair every Thursday night, I had been their unwilling cuckold for over 15 years. They must have laughed at me behind my back. Now Luke's expensive Christmas and birthday gifts made sense to her. Dale was waiting for me when I got out of the car. I found out that Cheryl called him about our plans. Dale even provided me with the key needed to gain access to Luke Barrow's house and the code to disable the alarm if one was installed. He handed me a piece of paper with a phone number. "This number," he said, "will lead you to those who can provide the service for a reasonable fee." I spoke to them, and they are expecting your call. He explained that he grew up on the streets and still had the connections to organize a few things. The access codes to Barrow's house, he said, would be valid until the end of next week, and then Luke Barrow would be reminded to change his access. He was going to sue Barrow for child support from April's birthday. Things were about to get very expensive for Luke Barrow. Under state law, it could not be terminated by declaring bankruptcy. If Dale gets his way, his former boss will be ruined before he's done. He was going to sue my wife, Grace, for adultery, marital neglect, and fraud for knowingly passing off Luke Barrow's daughter as mine. Dale suggested that we temporarily transfer my parental rights to April, to my parents pending the outcome of the trial. I asked him why. Dale explained that this way they wouldn't be able to tell that you were using April against them. "I know that Luke will go against you dirty and cruel. He will treat you the same as all the lower elements, giving them the maximum punishment for small things. Sometimes the best defense is a powerful attack." I offered to use my debit card to prepay for his services, and he refused, saying that my wife would immediately notice and could guess what I was doing. "Write me a check and I will hold it until they are notified." As soon as I left, I knew for sure that everything he did would be done in a way that would give me an advantage and time to figure things out. Katie. I really found the best one for me. After leaving, I realized that Dale had his own reasons for such actions against Luke Barrow. Both Grace and Luke will soon face a lot of problems that they didn't even know about. Dale Britton just created his own version of the scam game. I signed all the necessary paperwork so that as of Friday, my parents had parental rights to April and gave them a copy. After Dale and I explained the whole situation to them, they agreed that it made sense. I was waiting for Cheryl to arrive in her 2002 Ford Taurus. David went on his first business trip. Cheryl left her car with me and took David's car home. My eldest daughter informed me that their mother would not be home for dinner as she was planning to join her friends right after work. As soon as Cheryl arrived, we made the exchange and I put my suitcase in the trunk. "Ed," Cheryl said, "the dispatcher and all the guys are aware. All I need is to know where." "Thank you," I said. "Dale said to call him if everything goes according to plan so he can personally serve them the subpoena. I'd like to know why Dale is so eager to take down Luke Barrow." "For sale, it's a matter of principle," Cheryl said. "Luke has trouble standing behind his words." It was interesting to see Grace and Luke drive off in their separate cars. Both went to Charlie's Bar and Grill and shared a steak dinner. Then one went one way and the other went the other. I just drove closer to Luke Barrow's house and waited. Dale's friends, now my team, were ready for anything. I was in a safe location with a direct view of Luke's house. Grace arrived first. After she entered the code into the box to disable the alarm, she used her key to unlock the door. We filmed her long enough to see her enter the house. 10 minutes later, Luke arrived. Grace opened the door to greet him. Her blouse was completely unbuttoned, and she had no bra. Her full breasts were on full display. Luke hugged Grace and kissed her passionately. While they were kissing, I noticed his hands starting to play with her breasts. As soon as they closed the door, I stopped filming. 6 of the 8 rooms in Luke's house were equipped with video and sound. Neighbor Luke Barrow's son, who is serving a long sentence, agreed to let us use his house as our base. Everything recorded inside Barrow's home was streamed live to any Facebook page they were associated with. We found out that they had a team watching my car because Grace believed that I would give in to temptation and start looking for new love that evening. I texted Cheryl to let her know what I just heard. She called her husband David to tell him he was being watched. As a former Marine, he took direct precautions and intentionally pulled his car safely off the road around 10 p.m. He then had to call a tow truck to get it out. He called his wife to report the incident. She sent me a message. I said everything was ready and gave the address. While I was waiting for things to happen, I snuck up to the Barrows' house and took the valves out of all their car tires because I didn't want them to have the opportunity to start cleaning up the mess they were about to get themselves into. The lovers had nowhere to go for a long time. The police arrived and were knocking on the door, with the blue lights flashing, looking for Grace Adams. Luke Barrow tried to deny she was there until officers pointed out her car in the driveway. Grace finally walked to the door, wrapped only in a sheet. "Mrs. Grace Adams, your husband Edward Paul's car was involved in a traffic accident near Little Rock, Arkansas. Your parents suggested we check here when you could not be found." I took great pleasure in watching Grace's face turn pale. The policemen deliberately lied to her in order to cause them both some discomfort. With that, the cops got into their cruiser and drove off, with me following close behind. From the moment the police arrived to the moment they left, everything was recorded and broadcast live on Facebook. We had evidence of an ongoing affair, and now the good citizens of the Cape knew about it. Around midnight, my eldest daughter Amy called saying, "Dad, Mommy isn't home yet and all my calls are going to her answering machine. I'm starting to worry she's not usually out this late. What should I do?" "Call Luke Barrow's cell phone and ask him to give it to your mom," I said, texting her the number. "What does this have to do with her boss?" Amy asked. "He's been her Thursday night boyfriend for over 16 years, I said. I hung up and sent Amy part of a clip of Grace in a sheet talking to the police and Luke Barrow in just his pajama pants using a secret phone. 10 minutes later, Amy called again and said, "Mom's phone suddenly started working. She called me. She told me she was on Lower East Broadway with 4 flat tires. I knew she was lying and said it was impossible because it's nowhere near Luke Barrow's house. She said she was telling the truth, so I told her I saw a clip of her and her lover talking to the police. She asked what clip and I sent it to her. Mom couldn't explain why she was wearing a sheet. Don't expect her home for a few more hours, but you can do me a favor and open the front door," I said. I was getting out of the car when my daughter Amy saw me. She watched as I took my suitcase out of the trunk and walked towards her. As soon as I put my suitcase down, my mobile phone rang. It was Dale Allen Britton. I answered and turned on the speakerphone. "Ed, I just served them both with summons right at his house," Dale said. "Your wife and her lover are now prohibited from coming within 500 feet of you or any of your children. I will notify the Cape Police Department before returning home." "Do yourself a favor and don't talk to her at all," Dale added. "If she shows up even to get clothes, call the police." "Understood, and so does my eldest daughter," I said. "Thanks, Dale." "Amy, go open the garage so I can put Cheryl's car in there," I said. "I should be in Little Rock." That's what we did. "Dad, is this why the door lock came to us at about 6 in the evening to change the locks?" Amy asked. "Yes, it was a last-minute decision," I said. "I asked Katie to order it because it became obvious that everything would go according to plan." "What caused all this?" Amy asked. "The DNA test your grandfather sent to Ancestry.com," I said. "They found a match for April. He told me about it at work on Monday. When I contacted this woman, it turns out that your mom's boss is her son, whom she gave up for adoption when she was only 15. Amy's daughter was shocked. I hugged her tightly until she calmed down. Then we dimmed the lights and went into the kitchen to talk quietly. I turned on the recorder and let Amy listen to the conversation between her mom and me while driving back from Nashville. It was very revealing to hear her mom's words from her own lips. "Why did Mom want you to have an affair, Dad?" Amy asked. "To lessen the effects of her own if it were ever discovered," I said. It's sad that her proposal led to the truth coming out. There was a knock on the door. Since I was officially not supposed to be home, Amy opened it. It was the policeman who told us that he had stopped a taxi with Grace and told her that she would be breaking the restraining order if she went any further. My eldest daughter and I discussed all this for the rest of the night. We both agreed that Grace should be a writer because she always had stories to tell about partying with her friends. "I still can't believe that Mom had an ongoing affair with the same man for over 16 years, Amy said. "Why didn't we see this?" "That was easy," I said. "You children were small. I was a sales manager and had to travel to meetings in different states every week. Because of the trust we have as a couple, I saw no reason not to bless your mom for a weekly night out with the girls." "Believe me, we all trusted her," Amy said. "That's what made us blind to what was going on behind the scenes." I sat stunned, unless my daughter said it. I would never have seen this. It was she who exploited our trust in her, which allowed her to escape punishment for so long. Amy saw tears filling my eyes and said, "That's what hurts the most. This is not an affair or a lie, but the realization that she deliberately used our beliefs about her as a tool to continue the only relationship that meant anything to her. If your mother did this to someone she loved," I said, "imagine what she will do to us when she starts hating us for what she has to go through." Amy stood up to make us both a fresh cup of coffee. It was then that I realized that dawn was beginning. I received a text notification from my cell phone. "This is from your mother. She would like to be able to talk to me as soon as possible," I said. "She says our eldest has problems at home that we need to discuss before I return from my trip." "How are you going to answer her?" my daughter asked worriedly. "Don't worry. Be happy, Luke. And you can still laugh at that big fool behind my back," I said when I wrote it. "You can still move to St. Louis with Luke Barrow, which was your plan all along, but not with our kids." Amy looked at me in complete shock. "Your mother didn't need me anymore," I said. "My usefulness to her is over. She wanted me to have an affair so she could use it against me in divorce court. She never thought for a moment that after all this time she would be caught." It must have been very painful for Amy to hear the words I wrote to her mother. Not many people are able to face the truth. Most will call the person who revealed this every vile name ever known, because the real truth hurts. In time, they will accept it. I stood up and picked my daughter up as she started crying again. We reassured her when we heard Eric and April move. I turned on the Kavos 12 TV in the kitchen to watch the local morning news, as always. It didn't take long before they went down to breakfast to start the day. They were surprised to see me at home. We were all surprised to see my wife's image on the screen. My son turned up the volume out of curiosity. At that moment, I felt sorry for my children because he and Luke were discussing how stupid I was. Grace said bluntly, "Doofus is such an idiot that he doesn't notice everything that happens around him." Their mother then made a sarcastic remark towards me, which made them both laugh. Then the reporter spoke. "I don't think they're laughing now," he said. After 5 hours of live streaming the behavior of long-term lovers on Facebook, their plan to frame Edward Adams so she could divorce him and take everything he had backfired on them. The next scene showed Dale serving them both with lawsuits. The reporter explained why the lawsuits were filed. Alice just rushed over to me and sat on my lap, sobbing. It was a hell of a way for a 16-year-old to find out that her father was not her biological father, but her mother's long-term lover. Once April had calmed down, Amy helped me explain what had happened since their mother and I began our return from Nashville. I called their school and gave them Friday and Monday off so they could adjust and deal with most of their emotions. We were about to start breakfast when April said, "Dad, the chief of police is going to speak." This caught our attention, so we turned up the volume. It has now been publicly announced that Grace Adams and Luke Barrow, our current district attorney, are now facing criminal investigation. A special team from across the country was assembled to lead the investigation. I thought to myself that when a person's behavior becomes public knowledge, the masses cannot publicly accept what they do in private. Hypocrisy rules our society every day. After breakfast and cleanup, I made my 3 children sit down at the table. I showed each of them a copy of the letter my father had received. Then I said, "April, my parents are picking you up to take you to meet your bio-father's mom. She's dying of cancer and has asked to see you. There's a very good reason why, but I think it's best to have that woman explain it to you, whom you will meet. As far as I care, you are my daughter and always will be. Also, if you have questions, ask your grandparents. Amy, will you help your sister pack for the weekend while I call my parents?" I asked. As soon as the girls left, my son said, "How are you coping, Dad?" "I can't cope," I replied. "I'm in a constant battle trying to maintain my composure. Remember, son, if this ever happens to you, as a father you have to stay strong for everyone else in your life." With these words, I called my parents and explained where I was. They said they would be there as soon as possible once they finished loading their car. They still had an hour before they had to catch the plane. I didn't realize that it was at that moment that the relationship between my son and I changed forever for the better. The 3 of us watched as the daughter I raised left with my parents to meet her biological grandmother for the first time. I prayed above all else that everything would go well and that she would come back still feeling the same way about me. The DA's office felt like a morgue. Grace Adams went out to buy new clothes after her car was towed, and the valves on all 4 tires were replaced. Luke Barrow read the lawsuit against him. Although they did not have a direct DNA sample, they linked him biologically in such a way that he could not deny paternity. Now everyone in the state knew the truth about their relationship and long-term affair. That, and the fact that they were hiding April Adams' true identity, was becoming a political nightmare. By law, fraud has expanded over time to include failure to disclose every relevant fact regarding a situation. Dale sued them both jointly in civil court over this. It looked more and more like they had been deceiving her husband Ed for years as a couple. Every lawyer he talked to said Ed Adams and Dale Britton would be successful. The same lawyers he was still in contact with wanted nothing to do with it. Most of them had already heard about what Date did last time as a defendant. It was noted that most defenses were based on the assumption that a certain set of facts would be presented in such a way that they could be challenged. With Dale, when he presented arguments in court, most had no defense left by the time he finished. Revealing their behavior on Facebook and both clearly admitting that they were trying to destroy an honest man in order to escape with as many of his assets as possible would not mean much, but because of his position in society, it was front-page news. Grace had just left a store that she had shopped at for years because of the quality and uniqueness of the clothing lines. The last thing she expected was to run into a woman asking her if she was crazy because she had to know it would end badly. When Grace asked what the woman was talking about, she replied that she had, as the woman put it, been made a star on Facebook for at least 5 hours. She returned to Luke's house around one afternoon to find that the company had just finished a house call. They assumed that she was the owner of the house and suggested that she and her husband reset all the security codes in the house. Only after they left did she realize that she had not been asked to confirm their presence with an electronic signature. She called Luke and asked him who wanted to make sure he couldn't take the new position in St. Louis. When he asked why, she told him what she came back with. They then began to suspect that there was more to it than just Ed protecting himself, because they both knew that his new job was a political assignment from the deep state. After she made herself some coffee, she sat down and read the divorce petition. The first blow came when she learned that it was her own words to her husband that aroused his suspicions. Her husband wondered why she was asking him to intentionally hurt and use another person for his own personal gratification. But the fact that Mom and Dad Adams informed him of the DNA match from Ancestry.com led him to discover April's true parentage, giving him irrefutable proof of the fact that she was in the affair. Grace began to realize that Ed must now have known that this was going on. Ed was behind what happened last night. Ed was the one who revealed the hidden facts of her life. Just as she took another sip of coffee, the doorbell rang. Standing up, she walked to the front door and opened it, revealing it to be the neighbor next door, whom Luke didn't like. "Mr. Primrose," she said, "how can I help?" He handed her a legal envelope and said, "Ed, your husband, used my house as a base of operations against you and your long-term lover last night. I gladly allowed him to do this because Luke Barrow secured the maximum sentence for my son for the first time. Crime. I just thought you might want to know that the information in the envelope I gave you will also be delivered by courier to everyone he knows on your side of the family this evening. Ed asked me to ask you if you're still laughing at him. Now?" She watched him leave with the biggest smile on his face. Returning to the kitchen, Grace opened the envelope. There were photographs inside. They began with her entering Luke's house with her key. Then she met him at the door when he came home. Their sexual games in the living room, images of one taking off another's clothes. It was all in the photographs. Even how the police confronted them. Ed's team was professional. The delay was so complete that it now seemed as if he was working with a group of police officers who wanted revenge on Luke for their own reasons. But it was the last printed page, signed by her husband, that said it all. If it went public, it would create a lot of problems that they weren't prepared for. Her plans to force her husband to submit to her wishes were falling apart before her eyes. The question now is how to minimize the damage caused by Ed making this a public spectacle. Grace, I knew last Sunday by the time we got back from Nashville that you were trying to set me up so you could divorce me. I have since admitted that I have tried to understand what I did to make your love for me turn into pure hatred. Now I know why. I see that you blame me for what you felt was missing in your life, when we only had 2 children. I believe you felt trapped in your marriage and wanted to return to your carefree single life. Otherwise, you wouldn't have turned to him to rediscover single life. By doing this, you allowed him to take you away from something you hated for a few hours a week. I know that the only reason you stayed married to a man you hated and thought was dead was because Luke didn't want to take on the responsibility of raising children, even our own. Considering your opinion of me, you would never leave them alone with me. Such a non-entity. Your pride wouldn't allow it. This resulted in you living a life of deliberate lies. Every day that you both shirked responsibility, your contempt for who and what I am grew. I became more and more a fool and an idiot in your eyes. How much did Luke and you laugh at the unknown cuckold? Did you inspire his love for you by humiliating me or laughing at me? What I cannot forgive or forget is the message that you and the one you consider to be your real husband sent to our children because it will affect them for life. What I still couldn't understand was how much fun Luke and you had playing with the lives of me and our children as if we were nothing more than chess pieces on a playing field. The Kavos 12 reporter summed it up well when he asked you both if you still laugh at Grace Adams' husband, Edward Adams, now. I watched as Amy, Eric, and April watched as you and your lover revealed your plans for me through the public media. It was devastating to watch our children as you joked and laughed about how easy it would be to fool that stupid fool, the dumbass. I didn't ask them what their relationship with you would be like in the future. So far, I can honestly say that they are non-existent. Your and your lover Luke's absolute contempt and disregard for me led to this. At least we both know you're overjoyed because you left me with the reputation of being a miserable fool for the rest of my life. Perhaps you can both toast your victory tonight. Adi. Grace's hands began to shake so much that she dropped the paper. She looked like an angry, bitter, hateful, and cruel, uncaring bitch. The only thing that mattered to her was herself and the satisfaction of her bodily needs. Then her sobs broke the silence in the room. Ed was the only person she knew who could destroy someone's reputation without outright condemnation. Anyone who read it could not dispute his observations about what their behavior was saying. In his eyes, everything she ever did was to prolong her lifestyle, not out of love. He should have realized that Luke was the one who insisted she leave him and the kids before she got April pregnant. This new job for Luke forced them to accelerate their long-term plans. They were originally going to wait until April finished school, when her true origins could be revealed without any real consequences. He was right to a certain extent, because she wasn't laughing now. He effectively pointed out that it was their own behavior that proved the truth of his words. Ed believed that their contempt for who and what he was the reason they were trying to destroy him completely. Not to mention it was a declaration of war. If he was going to fall, he would take them both with him. Grace picked up the divorce suite and continued reading. It was truly devastating. One of the lawsuits against them was for fraud due to their concealment of April's true origins. She was accused of emotional and psychological abandonment, betrayal, and slander. But when she looked at the amount of damages they were suing for in the fraudulent case, she felt bad. If he wins, both Luke and her will be penniless for a long time. Ed and his lawyer argued that they could no longer treated like the fool they believed in him. Saturday was a crazy day for my two oldest and me. From early morning until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, relatives came to see us as a family. Grace's parents, 2 brothers, 1 sister, and their spouses came to offer their support. Everyone brought their favorite dish, so we had something to eat. Even my brother and sister came from far away to check on me. The 3 of us were enveloped in love and support. Everyone who came, it was difficult to understand how Grace could deceive them for so long. Everyone agreed that what came out on social media was proof that she was trying to destroy me out of hatred. My father-in-law and I grabbed a cold beer and went out on the back porch for a few minutes. "Edward, let it go," he said. "Cora is inside to give you some privacy and will keep them away until you calm down." He stayed with me until it passed. "Cora and I are planning to change our will," he said. "What should have been Grace's share will be divided among your 3 children. She may be our daughter, but I will never forgive her for what she has become." We had just finished emptying the house when my dad called. "April met that woman," my father said. "You can definitely see some family resemblance. Their meeting went well. Mrs. Smith took an interest in your family situation and got April to open up to her about her feelings about it. It was good to see because she kept it to herself. The lawyer took the required blood sample and then took me for a private conversation," my father said. "He asked me about Luke Barrow and I told him everything we knew. I learned that his real father was in prison for life for murdering his mistress's husband. Luke would have received his real mother's inheritance if April had not appeared in his life." "Don't worry, Dad," I replied. "Dale Britton received a restraining order prohibiting him from coming within 500 feet of us. It was a busy day here, with many relatives from both sides coming to offer their support. We were placed at Mrs. Smith's estate as her guests. Your mother felt honored to be treated so royally," Dad explained. "April is upstairs with Mrs. Smith. We both like her. Her lawyer said he hasn't seen a smile on the old lady's face in a long time. Wait, I'll give you the phone to your mom. Ed, I had the opportunity to speak with Beatrice alone for a while. She asked me what kind of son you were, so I talked about your life, trying to be as open and honest as possible. We discussed in detail what happened last week. She told me that she left it up to her to tell April why she wanted to see her. She said she hadn't seen such respect from a stranger in a long time, then thanked us all for showing her how to handle a situation involving her property." My mother continued, "Her plan is to leave everything in a trust in April's name, which you will manage until she turns 25. Send me a message when you leave so I can make sure I'll be home when you pick her up," I asked before hanging up. I sent April a message telling her we all miss her and sending her our love, Dad. We finally had time to clean the house before David and Cheryl arrived with me in the car. I had to apologize to her for forgetting to return it. "The police chief sees a chance to bring down Luke Barrow," Cheryl said. "He and Dale work together. Dale gave him some questionable things to investigate. The staff were all depressed and upset when I came back," David said. I told them in general terms that some of us knew what was going on most of the week and helped where we could. It's been an emotional roller coaster here since Thursday night, I said. The kids still have a hard time coping sometimes, so I'll take Monday off too. Have you heard anything from Grace? Cheryl asked. Not since Thursday night, I replied. Luke and she are probably too busy getting on with their lives since they've made it publicly clear how they see us. My youngest daughter called me early Sunday morning to ask if she and her grandparents could come home late Monday. I gave my blessing if her grandparents agreed. She thanked me for making her go. I asked why? April said, Mrs. Smith made me accept the fact that it wasn't my fault because my mother's affair brought me into this world. Mrs. Smith made it clear, Dad, that we are all innocent victims and don't deserve what's on us. Collapsed because of the behavior of her son and my mother. I love you, Daddy, she said before ending the call. Amy, Eric, and I watched as my mom and dad pulled into our driveway on Monday evening. My parents looked tired and stressed. As soon as she got out of the car, she ran into my arms. I have to admit, it was nice to have my youngest daughter home again. My dad opened the trunk and took out her suitcase. Eric immediately took it to her bedroom. The three of them then went to the family room so April could tell them all about her new grandmother. This gave my parents and I a chance to catch up. We went to the kitchen. While I was making fresh coffee, my parents gave me their opinion of Mrs. Beatrice Smith. When we left, she was calm, my dad said. She seemed to reach a point where she was ready to accept her death. Meeting April and accepting April was important to her. Mom took a legal envelope from her purse and handed it to me, explaining, "This was given to me by her lawyer on Beatrice's instructions." I opened it and took out the letter. The first thing I noticed was a check for $50,000. The letter was short and concise. The great lady thanked me for fulfilling her request. She was informing me that she had already lived past her expected date before I contacted her. DNA confirmed the biological connection. April is a lovely young lady. You raised her well. Use the tools I have given you to get through the difficult period you are facing, and remember to stay true to your values. I let my parents read it. It was difficult to understand that my parents and I may have fulfilled the last wish of a dying man. Over coffee, I told them everything that happened during their trip. I said that I felt like the worst was behind us emotionally as a family, and that starting tomorrow, we would return to our normal routine. For the rest of the week, things went smoothly, given the circumstances. Grace tried to contact each of our children by cell phone, but was basically told not to call again. Head office was thrilled that I was no longer in sales meetings and began looking for a sales manager for the first time in 10 years. I was sitting in my office, looking at my monthly sales reports, when Katie poked her head in the door and said, "Let's go." I looked at her and asked, "What now?" I received an email informing me that your latest letter to Grace has been published online on the Southeast Missouri newspaper website. I went to the website and found a section called Speak Up to discover it. Katie came up to me and read it, standing over my shoulder. By the time she finished reading, she was crying. "I wrote it when I was emotional," I explained. "Maybe I was a little too cruel." "No, Ed," Katie said. "You simply pointed out what their long-term behavior showed in a cold and direct way. Either of them could have ended it and confessed. Luke got the benefits of a long-term relationship without the costs." "That's what I thought," I said. "Look at the last comment," I said, reading it out loud. "As a feminist, I have spent most of my life fighting for equality and empowerment. What this woman and her lover did to her husband and children will forever tarnish our movement." Grace and Luke were at Charlie's Bar and Grill having dinner. Usually on Friday nights, this place was packed to capacity, but today there were only empty tables around them. When they asked the waitress why, she explained that we have people waiting who refuse to sit next to you two in public. The waitress continued, "Probably because most people read the publication of your husband's last letter to you, Mrs. Adams, on the Southeast Missourian newspaper website." Grace and Luke asked for the check and quickly left, realizing that it was best for them to stay away from the public for a while. Both began to adjust to the fact that their world had become much smaller due to their behavior. As they walked out, Grace noticed her mother and father sitting at a table waiting for their order. Grace approached them, Luke followed her. As she spoke, her father looked at them and said, "Mr. Barrow, I suggest you take your companion away from here and let my wife and I eat in peace." Grace left the restaurant in tears, finally realizing that if you go too far, there is no turning back. She will live the rest of her life with the consequences of what she and Luke did. When they got back to Luke's place, they went to the site and saw for themselves what the comments were saying. It was clear that the public had a clear hatred for both. 3 months later, I sat in the passenger seat of my car, watching April drive. We left in the morning for Wichita, Kansas because we heard that her grandmother Beatrice had passed away. We were driving to the airport to use the private jet provided by her estate. April took her loss hard as they grew closer, through constant phone conversations after she returned from her trip. Amy and Eric were very supportive, which brought the four of us closer together. Both of them began to push me to make new acquaintances, but I was wary of this. Once burned, twice careful. Luke and Grace now live in St. Louis. Federal authorities allowed him to start work earlier. The county was happy to get rid of him early if he would reimburse more than $45,000 in questionable expenses. They were now living in a rented 2-bedroom apartment in case they had to file for bankruptcy due to the civil suit that was about to begin. Under Missouri law, they could only retain $10,000 of equity each. Our divorce was finalized under state law. Grace had to pay me child support while they were in school and cover 50% of their living expenses if they lived in the dorms. The civil fraud trial was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. My children still refused to talk to their mother, as did her side of the family. She learned the hard way that people can only tolerate so much nonsense before moving on forever. April had to endure a meeting arranged by the State Children's Services with her biological father. It didn't go well for him. She told him that his mother told her that he was a narcissist, just like his real father, and that he should not be allowed near any woman. In front of Child Services officials, April told him that both he and her mother were dead to her in her eyes. We attended her grandmother's funeral. The lawyer then informed us of the enormous size of her inheritance. It was amazing for both of us. As trustees, after discussion with my daughter, we decided to sell her grandmother's house with all contents except personal jewelry and a few photographs that April wanted to keep. When we returned home, the school year was coming to an end. I was getting ready for the first day of court on Wednesday when April walked in. "Dad, can you set up a meeting with Luke and Mom and their lawyers on Tuesday with us and Dale?" April said. "I think so, but why?" I asked. "I want them to see the real cost of what they did," April said. "Grandma Beatrice suggested this to me." So I called Dale and we set up a meeting. It was a bright, sunny day when we sat down with Luke, Grace, and their lawyers. "I asked for this meeting," April said. "For my biological father, I want to give you this. This is the whereabouts of your father and his request to visit him in prison. He is serving life for the murder of his mistress's husband." April handed him a sealed envelope with his name on it. I enjoyed the looks on Luke and Grace's faces. "You should both know that my biological grandmother left me over $100 million, which is held in trust under my father, Edward Adams, until I turned 25 years old," April stated. "That money could have been yours, Luke, if she hadn't discovered me." April continued. "When she found out how I was created and what came of it, her views on moral principles and standards came into play. That's when she excluded you. In my grandmother's eyes, what you both did was disgusting." "Dale Britton, my trust will pay my father's legal fees," April said. "Luke and Mom, maybe you should try mediation before you go to court, because if we have to, we will take this to the Supreme Court. Mom, you have to realize that even though you created me in sin, that doesn't give you the right to consider it acceptable. Fortunately, my grandmother made me understand that it was my father's moral principles, standards, and views that make me who I am. I left that meeting feeling both proud and humbled. My daughter said everything. What happened tomorrow didn't matter anymore, because today I was blessed with what really matters. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.